10. Attack in the Bahamas. In 2018, Will Krause was spearfishing in the Bahamas with a group of friends when he had a rather unexpected encounter with a reef shark. Reef sharks are not typically that dangerous. People aren't quite as afraid of these sharks as they are of great whites, but they're still sharks and they still have extremely sharp teeth. Will was lucky to survive when the 7-foot, 2.1-meter long monster grabbed his head and neck and nearly chomped his entire torso in half. After the nightmare was over, Will was speaking with news crews and said the only thing he can remember is the sound. He was underwater, swimming around, and then suddenly the shark's mouth covered his whole head. He recalls a distinct crunching noise, like his ears were filled with cracking of sticks. In reality, that crunching sound was the shark's teeth ripping his flesh open. For some unknown reason, the shark decided to spit Will out instead of fully eating him. It left him with huge, gaping wounds. Will was bleeding profusely the entire boat ride back to the shore. Yet it could have been so much worse. If the shark had bitten him a few more times, Will may have lost his head. 9. Lost in Malaysia. In April of 2022, Malaysian Maritime Enforcement Agency officers were on the hunt for foreign divers who'd gone missing off the coast of Johor's Mersing. 3 Europeans and their instructor surfaced from a dive but couldn't find their boat. They'd gone too deep, there was nobody on the boat to keep track of them, and when they came up out of the water, they were in the middle of nowhere. A British man in his 40s named Adrian, a teenage French girl named Alexia, and the British man's Dutch son, Nathan. What followed was an absolute nightmare for everyone involved. After diving for about 40 minutes, then surfacing and not finding their boat, they began to drift in extremely strong ocean currents. This drifting ended up separating them. They were then stuck at sea for days, surviving only thanks to their diving buoy and by drinking the rainwater. Finally, the instructor was discovered. She was rescued in the waters off of southern Malaysia the day after they were sent adrift. Then the British man and the French girl were discovered shortly after in the waters of Indonesia. The pair had floated over 80 miles, 129 kilometers from where they'd started. They were quickly taken to the hospital and reported in stable condition. Sadly, Nathan didn't make it. The British man's son, who was only 14, was the only one in the party to drown. As for the boat captain who was responsible for the whole mess, he was arrested by the police when he tested positive for drugs. 8. Water filter horror. On March 27, 2021, a young Mexican boy was killed at a water amusement park in a tragic swimming accident. It happened at the Zenzi's Park in Playa del Carmen. The boy was at the Rapid River ride when he got sucked into the water filter system. According to the local news reports, his name was Leonardo Luna Guerrero, and he was visiting the park with his parents. He was sucked into the water filter system because one of the employees had left it open. So when little Leonardo swam by, there was no metal grill over the filter, and it inhaled him like a giant vacuum. After this horrifying swimming accident, the boy's father, who happens to be a respected cardiologist, took to social media to accuse the park of negligence. He told the public about how he had to free his son from the water filter with the help of other visitors because the force of the suction was too great for him to do it on his own. After he got his boy out of the water, he performed CPR. But he'd been underwater too long and there was no resuscitating him. The boy's father also complained that the staff at the park had no idea how to perform first aid. They left the dangerous grill open, and they didn't even have the knowledge to help any drowning victims. Even more horrifying is the fact that after this man's son died from a pulmonary hemorrhage brought on by drowning, the hospital forced him to sign an indemnity form. The form was designed to protect the park from legal action. It was the only way the hospital would agree to give his son's body back. 7. Croc attack. It was in the summer of 2020 when a 30-year-old man in India found himself being dragged underwater by a crocodile. His name is Amit Jatav, and he was only saved because his quick-thinking friend managed to beat the crocodile off with a selfie stick. The terrifying incident happened at the Kaliasot Dam in Bhopal. Amit and his friend had gone down to the lake because they were bored during the lockdown. These guys work in the local shops, and they didn't really have any business, all things considered. So they were splashing and playing in the shallow water of the dam and recording themselves with the selfie stick. Then, from out of nowhere, a crocodile clamped its teeth onto Amit's thigh and dragged him under the water. According to what Amit told the Times of India from his hospital bed, he thought it was all over for him. Luckily, his friend Gadendra came to the rescue. He dove into the water after the crocodile, who at this point had taken Amit about 6 feet, 1.8 meters deep. And he had a selfie stick like a spear in front of him. He poked the sharp part of the stick against the vicious water reptile, and it was just enough for the croc to release Amit's body. But he was still in some serious trouble. Amit's thigh was ripped apart pretty badly by the crocodile's teeth. He needed to have 30 stitches because a huge chunk of his thigh had been ripped right out. 6. Heart attack in the water. In 2017, a 61-year-old man died while diving off the Canary Islands. He was actually the 3rd British death in the area that year, an ex-man who'd been visiting a unique underwater exhibit. He's only been identified by his initials LG. He'd gone with a group to visit the Underwater Atlantic Museum, or the Museo Atlantico, the very first underwater art museum to ever open to the public in Europe. But what nobody had anticipated was that LG would become extremely unwell during the dive. There was something majorly wrong, and he had to be helped back up to the surface and onto a rescue boat. When rescuers finally got his suit off, they realized this guy was having a heart attack. It had started while he was taking a leisurely dive, looking through more than 300 sculptures sitting at the bottom of the sea floor, about 45 feet, 13.7 meters deep. It took so long to get back to the shore that by the time the boat touched down, the poor man was already dead. 5. Sydney shark attack. In early 2022, one of the most horrific shark attacks in human history took place off the coast of Sydney, Australia. The entire thing was captured on video, and it's quite graphic. A swimmer was out in the ocean, minding their own business on a Wednesday afternoon. It was a pretty busy day. People were fishing, everyone was relaxing in the sand. And then, about 100 feet, 30 meters out into the water, the blue suddenly turned red. It was as if a miniature blood volcano had just started erupting under the water. And that was when the people on the beach realized someone was being attacked. In the video footage, you can hear someone screaming, "Shark! Big, great, white." And sure enough, there was a truly monstrous great white shark clearly eating the swimmer who'd been there just moments ago. There was absolutely nothing the paramedics could do when they arrived at the scene. The victim was in such bad condition that all paramedics could do was package up their remains and get them off the beach. It was the first fatal shark attack in Sydney since 1963. 4. Terror at Lake Pleasant. A 32-year-old woman by the name of Tehahan Smith died at Lake Pleasant in May of 2022. According to Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, she died following a brutal accident with a boat. She'd been swimming at about 5 p.m. when her leg came into contact with a boat propeller and was severed. It happened immediately upon jumping into the water. She leapt out the back of the boat, hit the water, kicked out with her leg, and her leg was cut clean in half by the propeller. She had to be airlifted to the hospital, but sadly died shortly after her arrival. And believe it or not, this was the 5th weekend in a row that the police had to respond to a similar incident at this exact same lake. The previous Sunday, an 18-year-old drowned while swimming near Sunset Ridge. And on May 8th, an 83-year-old man named Rosario Benitez was thrown off his boat because of a sudden gust of wind and died. And on the 2 consecutive weekends prior to the wind death, 2 men drowned. So far this year, somebody has died pretty much every single weekend at Lake Pleasant, and almost always in a bizarre or gruesome fashion. 3. Sucked into a nuclear power plant. A scuba diver was accidentally sucked into a nuclear power plant intake pipe. His name is Christopher LeCun, and he had no idea that while he was scuba diving off the coast of Florida, he was doing so right near a massive pipe from the St. Lucie power plant. The power plant pulls in about 500,000 gallons of ocean water every minute, using the enormous intake pipe. Anything that gets sucked in there is basically lost, even a human being. It was one of the scariest situations Christopher had ever been in. It was so turbulent inside the intake pipe that it took him nearly a minute just to figure out which way was up and which way was down. He had to hang on to his diving mask because of the force of the suction that was trying to suck it off his face. He then spent the next 5 minutes tumbling through pure darkness as he traveled up the pipe, which is about a quarter of a mile long. Then, as quickly as the whole nightmare started, it was over. The pipe spat him out into a canal. It was a pond inside the actual nuclear power plant. He touched down in a kind of filter pool with fish. He saw Goliath groupers and even massive tarpons that had been slurped in with him. He also saw a worker standing over him, totally perplexed. Christopher ended up being really lucky, as the nuclear plant worker said he and his colleagues were about to leave for the night. 5 minutes later, and the whole place would have been closed, and Christopher would have been stuck inside until the next day. 2. The deadly penguin dive. Spencer Brown finished his course in cybersecurity in 2021. But because of the pandemic that was going on, New York University wasn't holding any in-person graduations. So to celebrate his finished course, his wife decided to throw a big party at her parents' house in Alpine. The party was held on July 29, 2021. Everyone was hanging around outside by the pool. There were about 50 people eating cake, ice cream, swimming, and just having a good time. Everyone was happy, and Spencer most of all because he was also expecting his third child. And then, everything got very dark very quickly. Spencer found himself at the end of the diving board. He put his arms to the sides to do the penguin dive, something he'd done hundreds of times before. He jumped off the diving board, hit the water like a human torpedo, and his head smashed against the concrete at the rise where the shallow end of the pool starts. His neck and spine absorbed the impact, and he was dragged out of that pool an incomplete quadriplegic. He has very little sensation these days below his neck. He doesn't know if he's hungry, and he can't even tell if something's too hot or too cold. He has central cord system, according to his doctor at the University of Utah. His arms and hands are weaker than his legs, and he has spastic involuntary muscle movements. Hopefully, one day he'll be able to walk on his own, but for now, Spencer's stuck in a wheelchair, all because of a bad dive off the diving board. 1. A rare brain infection. In August of 2016, a woman from New York died of a rare brain infection after she went swimming. She was a student, just 19 years old and living in Kingston. According to the New York State Health Department, Kerry Stoutenberg's official cause of death was caused by an amoeba called Naegleria fowleri. The amoeba is contracted usually when someone goes swimming. It enters in through the nose, forces its way on the olfactory nerve into the brain, and causes a crippling infection called primary amoebic meningoencephalitis. This young student went for a swim somewhere in Cecil County to beat the summer heat. An amoeba swam up her nose, and she was dead by the end of the month. The fatality rate for this thing is over 97%, although infections are pretty rare. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention say there were only 37 of these infections from between 2006 to 2015. They say if you don't want an amoeba to swim up your nose and into your brain, you should always wear a nose clip when you go in fresh water. Thanks for watching. Would you rather contract a brain infection or get attacked by a giant shark? Let us know what your biggest swimming nightmare is in the comments below. And remember to hit subscribe if you haven't yet. See you next time. Bye.